it was a little freaky.
Yeah. All right. So Hangout on Air is now live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2016 Oscar movie marathon that I do every year with my good friend and co-host, Mike Meitin.
Hello.
So basically what this is, if you haven't listened to one of these before, is that we talk about the nominated movies, which ones we've seen, which ones we haven't, and then between now and when the awards are nominated, we see if we can see as many as we can. And then we talk about the ones that we managed to see, and then wrap it up at the end by talking about the winners.
Yes.
Pretty straightforward, really.
And we don't compete because if we did, Chris would always win.
Well, so the joke that I have made probably 4 years running now is that's because you have more of a life than I do.
And it remains probably as accurate as 4 years ago.
Although
you do have more of a life now than you have had in the past, I think.
That's true. The improv classes makes a difference there. It's something that I actually have to leave the house for example.
Yes, and you have friends from that you spend time with outside of the improv class too. You have stuff to do.
But oddly enough, this year too, our starting percentages are actually not that far off. Largely because mine is lower than it often is at the start.
Yes, well, and I took a look at this, and I guess we could talk about it now since we're talking about the percentages. This is going to be a really tough year because there are a couple very top-heavy ones, which there sometimes are.
Yeah.
And then there are a lot with like one or two nominations.
Yeah.
More than usual. Like I added it up. If you saw everything with more than like 2 nominations, only those, you'd only get to like 66% or something like that. I don't remember. I wrote it down somewhere, but I can't find it. And I think if you saw everything with more than 1, you'd only get into the 70s.
Yeah,
so
I believe
you can't carve out. I mean, you can still get a few big chunks, but you just can't carve away at it with 5s and 6s, which is frequently what you would have a lot. You would of those. Movies that have like 5 or 6, like because you see a lot of the stuff that had like special effects and makeup and editing and like some of those blockbuster things. You would have seen a lot more of those that would have like 3 to 6, which would put your starting percentage up into the 30s. But that's a lot harder to do this time,
Yeah. Well, and one interesting thing too is that in terms of which movies you and I have both already seen, there's a lot of overlap. Yes. There's only a hand, but we'll get into that. But it just means that there's a handful of movies that we can already both talk about because we've both seen them.
Yes, I think another thing that I noticed with the percentages is I feel like there's even of the big percentage movies, like the ones that have a lot of nominations, a lot of them only came out like for Oscar time.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of only very recent or limited release movies on the list this year.
So those two things I think have contributed to why the starting percentage is a little bit lower. Those were my thoughts.
I concur. I think you're right. But one of the other things that we typically always discuss at least a little bit, but I think is especially relevant to talk about this year, which is why the Oscars. What is it about the Oscars that is why what we've chosen it as the thing to build this around?
Because we love movies with white people.
Yay! Yeah. Well, certainly that's the controversy this year, and strikes me as a fairly legitimate one. 2 years in a row where all 20 acting nominees are all white.
Yes, I joke about it, but I am also cognizant that is a legit,
Well, right, and it's hard to know exactly what to do about that. But like, for example, I read an article that interviewed a couple of members of the Academy, basically trying to defend themselves, essentially, and it's some of the most passive-aggressive, like misunderstanding the real problem stuff that I've ever heard of. It's basically it's responding to the strongman, not strongman, but they're responding to the straw man argument that the Oscars So White hashtag is about saying that every single member of the Academy is actively racist, which is nonsense. That's not what's happening, and nobody's saying that's what's happening except people who are inclined towards hyperbole in the first place.
Right.
What we're saying is that perhaps the not especially diverse current membership of the Academy likes what they like, which reflects their background and what they like and everything. And what wins is the stuff that these people like. A lot of them are over 60. A lot of them are white. A lot of them are men. And they like what they like, which is fair. It doesn't make them racist if they like one movie better than another. It doesn't necessarily make them racist. It's because it's subjective. But the problem is when you have the voting community so lacking in diversity, it's almost obvious that you're going to end up with nominees that are also lacking in diversity.
Yes, and I think that's a part of the issue, is that there's not a lot of diversity within the Academy nominating committee to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also still reflective of the movie industry as a whole. And
Mm-hmm.
the reality is that white actors and actresses are getting the types of roles that can be in these positions more frequently. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like,
yeah, it's all a circle. You know, it's like which movies win. It's the ones that that are made to support what the Academy has shown in the past that they like. So the winners of one year guide what gets made the next year, which is what is chosen from to select the winners for that year, which then influences what is made the following year. And so when a studio is trying to make a movie that they hope will win Oscars, they are going to try to base that on what has won Oscars in the past.
yes.
And it doesn't ever have to be some explicit decision of, oh, better get that black actor out of here. He's going to ruin our chances. Nobody's saying that. Or at least nobody's saying that publicly. I doubt anybody's really saying that.
No, it doesn't feel like that, and it's
right. But it's just it's what it is an indication that collectively the Academy members do not seem very representative of the actual diverse movie-going public in America today.
Right.
And that does not mean every single Academy member is racist. Nobody is saying that. And so when you hear someone trying to defend against Oscars So White by saying, I find it offensive that they would say we're all racist. I voted for some actors of color and they didn't get picked. What can I do about it? That sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was just a very competitive year this year. 2 years in a row where all 20 are white. Yeah.
Right.
This tower is only made of ivory because it was a readily available material when we were building the tower.
Yes. And, outside of that piece of it, I think there were a couple other things that were going against that this year.
Mm-hmm.
For example, like take a film like, let's say, for example, a film like The Martian.
Mm-hmm.
There are black characters in it, prominent actors who do a very good job, but they are such a small part of that movie because of the focus of that movie that it's hard to really, like I thought Chiwetel Ejiofor, I forget how to say his name.
It's a hard to say name. It's unusual.
I thought he was phenomenal in that movie.
Yeah.
And the role that he did, but he had a very small role, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And yet that could still, we've seen supporting actors with smaller roles before, but they really have to blow the screen away for whatever reason. He didn't do that because it was a great, very serviceable role,
Mm-hmm.
which is also tough. One of the movies that has a nomination that has a black lead actor is Creed.
Mm-hmm.
And because Sylvester Stallone, at least my understanding, I haven't seen it, the movie itself was fine, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily Academy worthy, but Sylvester Stallone has that pedigree and stood out in that movie and almost
Mm-hmm.
overshadowed what the kid who played Creed
Mm-hmm.
did, and so
Yeah,
that
I mean,
almost
I haven't seen it either, so I mean, it's plausible that that's
right.
you
And then
know.
you have another nominated movie, Straight Outta Compton, which has some very good performances by some young black actors, but it gets into that weird, because they're all shared lead actors,
Mm-hmm.
not really supporting actors, so it gets a little strange with that. You
Mm-hmm.
know, some were noticeably better than others, but then again, it comes down, okay, well then if Academy is primarily what is that a movie they're really going to pick somebody from, especially when they're sort of there's someone who doesn't have a name yet.
Mm-hmm.
When I thought they did a tremendous job, a couple of they all
Yeah.
did well, but there were a couple really standouts in that movie. So
Right.
you have a couple of things with the films that had the opportunity that were almost working against them as well. So
Yeah.
it's a tough year for it, and there's all the other things that we just talked about. So
Right. Right. So the thing is, it's a complex issue, and it really doesn't do either side any good to try to distill it down to just calling the Academy racist, because that really minimizes and diminishes the true scope of the problem, which is that the prejudice that we're talking about here is not the overt kind of I don't like black people racism. It is the cultural bias of people voting for movies that reflect the kinds of things that they like and grew up with and identify with. So a
yes,
60-year-old white guy is less likely to identify with the characters in Straight Outta Compton. As a result,
yes,
the movies he identifies with better, he is more likely to like better and vote for. It's it's
yes,
it's really straightforward and there's no malice in it, but it's just an illustration of how you have kind of like an insular little mini culture that kind of becomes homogenized to a certain extent, and you're recognizing by the product it generates on a repeated basis
right. Yeah, because
what's
you look at the
happening.
list, and even the films that we haven't seen. I mean, you look at the
Mm-hmm.
people who were nominated,
Yeah.
and it's not like you're looking and you're like, oh, well, clearly that guy's only on here because he's white.
Right.
Like they all did a great job too. This isn't.
Yeah.
It's not to diminish the work that anybody did
Mm-hmm.
in the nominations. Like that, there's nobody in there that probably shouldn't be in there. At least that
Right.
I can see.
Well,
So it's
yeah,
just
that
it's very complex.
well, and so like I've seen some of the people who are talking about this issue talk about like who they thought got snubbed, deserved a nomination, they didn't get one or whatever. And there's an instinct, I think, when you feel strongly about that to try to pick who you think shouldn't be there as a result. But I
Right.
think it's not a helpful argument. First of all, the people who did get the nominations, it's not like it's their fault,
No.
right? And they probably did actually do a really good performance. But the problem is, it's just kind of it's a much more amorphous problem than that. And I think that this sort of conversation is very important to have, and that ultimately is the frustratingly slow moving way to actually solve the problem rather than just resort to name calling and defensive straw man
Yes.
arguments.
I hadn't actually seen who they thought was snubbed, so I just pulled some of that up real quick.
Yeah, I think the two you mentioned are the ones I've heard the most.
Yeah, Michael B. Jordan for Creed,
Mhm.
and then Straight Outta Compton for either the acting, but also Best Picture. It says that there's people who feel like it
Mhm.
should have been in that, and I would agree. It was one of my favorite movies of the year.
Mhm.
Um, and Will Smith for Concussion.
Tell
I'm
the
sure he
truth.
was. Yeah, I'm sure he was great, but I've heard that was a underwhelming film for as for what it was supposed to deliver, I heard it was fairly underwhelming. That's just what
Mhm.
I've heard. I haven't actually seen it, but
Yeah,
that's not
that's.
his fault. I'm sure he was
I feel
good.
like a lot of people talked about it because the trailer is distinctive. But yeah, I feel like even though I listen to podcasts where they talk about movies, all they ever talk about is the trailer because it has just that "tell the truth"
Yes.
bit, which I mean, is probably a powerful moment in the movie, but it just becomes kind of this sort of fun thing to say.
Well, and maybe for fun, if I see all of the best pictures, I will fall into that trap for the sake of the show and say which one I think Straight Outta Compton should replace.
Fair enough. Well, and because
Just for fun. I don't really care.
ultimately this is all subjective anyway, right? And the idea of declaring a winner has never been, never will be an objective measure of the best movie. Because, you and I, as we go through this AFI's top 100 movies list, there's plenty of times where we're picking out a movie that's like this enduring classic that has been considered a great film for 60 years, lost out in its Best Picture nominee to something nobody even remembers.
Yep.
Because it's all down to just what is in vogue at the time within the community of the Academy members. It's not necessarily going to stand the test of time. However, what it is, and the reason we kind of do this and enjoy this, is it presents a list that you can work from.
Yes.
And it's a way to encourage us and encourage others to see movies that you might not have made time to see otherwise. And often we discover, gems that's like some little thing you wouldn't have ever gone to see, except it turns out that it's great.
Yes, that was what I was going to say. Also, we felt the transition coming at the same time because
Ha!
that was a
You'd think we've
good.
been podcasting together and known each other for a long time.
Yes, I was going to say that was a good discussion. I led it with a sarcastic joke, which is something I tend to do. We had the discussion we needed to, and then we were ready to transition. I was going to say the same thing. Yeah, number one, why the Oscars? We love watching movies, and we made a little joke about it earlier about I have no life and all that. The reality is, we are a lot busier than we used to be with our commitments, and we don't necessarily the rest of the year make time to see all the movies that we would want to.
Right.
So this gives a little sprint where you can just go. It's a little bus bench,
Yeah.
Yeah, where you got to focus, and you go and you spend a month trying to see a lot of movies, and then you end up knocking out a bunch of stuff that you had planned to see anyway. And so that one's good. And then the other piece that you mentioned is by going through this process, almost always we find a movie that we would probably never have gone out of our way to see, that we say, man, I'm really glad I saw that. That was really interesting, and I never would have thought that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Plus, just like in an election, if you don't vote, you don't get to complain.
Yes.
So, likewise, if you didn't see any of it's just like when people are complaining that someone that they liked didn't get a nomination, but they hadn't seen any of the other five. It's like, it's not to say you have no right to complain, but you have less right to complain because you don't have the actual perspective to make a judgment. But in any case, let's talk about.
I was going to say there's one new thing I've discovered from this list over the past couple years that didn't really hit me in the first couple times we did it. What doing this exercise or this competition, whatever we're doing here, has ended up doing in a different way is movies. Like I feel like it buys me more free time later because there are movies that are like, oh, I should see that, and when it comes on or something, you know it's a good movie because it was like Oscar nominated, but it's some long thing, and you're like, oh, do I want to commit to it? Do I not commit to it? Well, if you've already seen it within the Oscar marathon, then the next time it comes on, if it wasn't the kind of thing that has repeatability, you can discount it and you don't feel the guilt or the time commit. Like it just relieves that pressure.
Right. It's like something you feel like you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it just gives you that extra nudge to just go ahead and do it. And then it's done.
Right. Like last year or the year before, I think it was last year, Boyhood.
Boyhood was last year.
Yeah, so Boyhood was the one that happened last year that reminded me of a couple of others. And I'm glad I watched it. I thought it was a great movie. I knew it was a movie that a great concept that was done interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I would have known at the end of the Oscars because of the who made it and the technique behind it and the sort of the uniqueness of it. I always would have felt like I should watch it. But now, since I've seen it and I don't really feel like watching it again, when it comes on, I can just discount that when I'm trying to make a choice of like what I'm going to watch on TV if it's like a Saturday evening or something, and I feel no guilt. And it's a silly thing, but
you can check it off the list.
Yeah, and there was, I think it was the year before. What that was, I don't remember what it was called. There was some weird thing where, the life thing, the tree of life.
Oh, was that just? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was that.
Maybe
that was
it was
a weird
3
movie.
years ago. Yeah,
that was Terrence Malick or something, right? Yeah, that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was one of those movies where you're like, oh, this is so unique and interesting, and you're like, oh, I feel like I should see that. And then once you've seen it, you're like, all right, that was fine.
Yeah.
And now any time it comes on, I can be like, okay, I definitely don't need to watch that, and I feel no guilt in just skipping to the next channel. Yeah.
In hindsight, I think of Tree of Life as an artfully made, boring movie.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way back, like The Diving Bell and the Butterfly is one of those, and I don't even think that was a boring movie, but that's a movie that was powerful, it was interesting, but it's not a kind of thing I really want to sit around and watch all the time. And
right.
And I feel like if I hadn't seen it, every time it comes up on on the DirecTV list, I would be like, oh, that's a thing I should see. Do I want to watch that tonight? Do I want to commit to that? But no, I don't have to now because I already seen it. I know what happens. I felt the emotional impact, and I'm on.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was my new addition that we haven't normally talked about.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Now we can go on.
All right. So, given that there are several movies that you and I have both seen, let's acknowledge them as we go through the list, but save the extended discussion. I don't know about saving it for like next time, but at least let's get through the list first. Otherwise, we run the risk of turning this into a 4-hour podcast.
Yeah, that works for me.
So let's just go ahead and start with the big ones, the Best Picture. Do you want to start with reading this one?
Yes, and you might have to help me with, because I want to give, since this is the first big list, I want to give kind of a quick description of them. Some of them I'm not 100% familiar with.
Okay, well, yeah, some of them I'm not 100% familiar with either, but we can sort of cover what we maybe do know about it.
Yeah, so The Big Short is, I understand that to be a dramatization of like the housing market thing.
Yeah, I believe that's the case. People who manipulated the stock market and such to make a lot of money at the expense of everybody else losing their shirts.
Yes, and we've seen for a couple of years, off and on, there's been some documentaries that have made the nominations for that. But this is really the first dramatization because, like anything, there has to be that little bit of lag time before you can get it, before you really can deliver a good drama. Like think about war movies and things like that. Like think how long it took before we could start getting, like in our lifetime, the good Iraq movies.
Yeah.
And now, just now, like starting with, but like Lone Survivor, and now we're starting to get, really only Michael Bay is going to pull something like that just happened last year. Or whatever.
Yeah, like War. He's got his new Benghazi movie. Yeah.
Yeah, that one and think about that. Like, at least for me, doesn't that feel a little soon to make like a big?
It feels like it's during an election year.
Yeah, it doesn't feel real. We're like Lone Survivor felt like, yeah, okay, this is right about the right time. Like this has happened. Like we've sort of come in near the end of that conflict for the most part, but we want to still remember why it's important that we come.
Well, yeah, I feel like it's not too soon the way you might say too soon about a joke, but too soon the way you might say doesn't really feel like history has reached a consensus on this yet.
Right. And you can go back, like, war movies I think are a great example, because if you go back, like, watch like John Wayne and the Green Berets, which came out like in Vietnam. And it's ridiculous compared to like when, that one took a lot of lag time because there were even strong, it was a long conflict with stronger emotions. And the really
well, it took
good
a while
movies,
to realize what was quite so like the war turned out to be different than America thought of wars up to that point.
Right. And so it took a while before you could get really accurate, depictions of that, like Platoon and things like that. It wasn't until the 80s when that stuff really started to come out, even, and you got the Platoon, you got the what's the.
Whereas there's Apocalypse Now, there's Full Metal Jacket, although Full Metal Jacket,
yeah.
Full Metal Jacket's a weird one to, I mean, because technically it's about Vietnam, but it's like a lot of it, the way it's actually depicting the war. I mean, like thematically it's about Vietnam, but then it all takes place in a city. So,
right. Yeah, it and Apocalypse Now are both more about the feel of Vietnam. But either way, like, there's a lot of that, and that's what you see. Like you saw, it took a few years before we got things like Jarhead, stuff like that, to talk about the Iraq War.
Right.
It took a few years before we get like Lone Survivor to talk about Afghanistan. This is kind of the same thing. Like, it was a pretty dramatic, big thing. And so we got documentaries, but now it's about the right time to have a dramatization. But anyway, that's that. Bridge of Spies is number 2.
That's the Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks leading. And I was a little surprised to see that get even as many nominations as it did, just because I haven't seen it, but my perception of the critical reaction was kind of meh. Like, it's Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, so it's not going to be terrible, but it's also like not really special either. That was the impression I had when it came out.
What was the time frame that depicts?
Came out, I feel, like when I think it took place like at the height of the Cold War, like that the story took place in.
Yeah. The poster has during the Cold War, Soviet Union captures pilot, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Brooklyn, I'm actually not familiar with at all.
I believe that's kind of a small, women in like 1930s New York or something like that. But that's about all I know myself.
Well, that's on there. Mad Max Fury Road is the, what do we call them these days? Reinvention, reimagination?
Well, technically it's just a new entry in the franchise, really. I mean, it's those movies are kind of standalone rather than, narratively continuing. But it's, you could call it a reboot, but it's really, you might as well just call it Mad Max 4 too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the first one of these nominees that we've both seen.
Yes, and that, which I know we'll get to in director, but I feel like it's relative to the fact that it's on here that it's a George Miller film. That makes it. He's not typically somebody you would see on this list, so that's good. The Martian is Gravity on Mars.
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit more jokey.
A little bit. Yeah.
It's not Golden Globe Best Comedy though, which just shows how bullshit that whole award is.
Yes, that's just here's another place to put more movies in. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is the same theme of Gravity in that, a person is stuck alone in a desolate space area and has to overcome the challenges.
Space is dangerous, but can be conquered by human ingenuity. Go team.
Yes. With that's the Matt Damon and Ridley Scott. So good pedigree there. The Revenant, not 100% sure what all happens. I think it's Leonardo DiCaprio in the cold, maybe fighting another guy and having to like. Yeah, survive.
So the trailer suggests somewhat of a narrative, but it's hard to know how reflective that is of the final story, especially considering if you compare this director's last movie, Birdman, the trailer versus the movie of that one, it's like, who even knows? But at the very least, it seems like Leonardo DiCaprio gets hurt really bad and everyone leaves him for dead, but then he comes back to get revenge or something.
Yeah. I feel like this is almost like what if Bear Grylls like really had to do the stuff that he pretends to do?
Well, there is a bear in it, apparently.
And apparently, I've heard that there's a scene where he has to sleep in the carcass or something. So it's
So I didn't even know that, but
spoiler.
Certainly, though, like anyone I've heard talk about the movie at all seems to all want to talk about the bear. So I don't know everything that goes on there, but it's relevant apparently.
Yes. Then Room, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is like someone they've either been kidnapped or somehow imprisoned.
Yeah, I know a little bit about that, although what I will say before we speculate too much is the one concrete thing that I've heard about this movie from someone who saw it is if you are able, see it without knowing anything else about it.
Okay.
So,
but all that I know about it is that I believe this lady is imprisoned by someone, whether it's someone she knows or kidnapped her, with her child. And so the child knows nothing but the room as their whole world. And then they escape or get let go or freed or something happens and they have to go out and adjust to the real world. And that's what I understand is the premise of the movie. Spotlight, I am unfamiliar with.
Spotlight is about the scandal of Catholic priests in the Boston diocese that were abusing kids and then getting shifted around.
That's right.
That's what that's about.
I had seen that at the Golden Globes.
Right.
So our list now in a summary recap is The Big Short, Bridge of Spies, Brooklyn, Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, The Revenant. I was about to say The Room, but it's not. It's Room.
Yeah.
And not The Spotlight. Spotlight.
Yeah. And then we have each both seen Mad Max and The Martian.
Yes.
But as previously agreed, let's hold off on actually discussing the movies we've seen in detail until we get through the list. Otherwise, we'll never get through the list.
Correct. And
all right.
Now that we've talked about that, I will say everything on here is sufficiently interesting enough to me. Other than Brooklyn, I don't know too much about that. I would be willing that this exercise, I will be making an effort to try to see all of these because I actually want to, not just because we are trying to complete the list. So,
right. Good. I concur. I feel the same. So the next category on our list here is Best Animated Feature. And the names are Anomalisa, Boy and the World, Inside Out, Shaun the Sheep Movie, and When Marnie Was There. And so I think probably most people will say, okay, I recognize Inside Out because that was a Pixar movie. And then not knowing any of the others. I think probably people with little kids would know Shaun the Sheep Movie because that was one of the Aardman style, like the Wallace and Gromit company that makes those and have that one particular style.
Yep.
Other than that, it was a forgettable kids movie that I didn't see back in March or something, as far as I know. Except that here it's nominated, so maybe it's better than I gave it credit for. Certainly the company has made good movies. Anomalisa, I'm really interested in seeing because that one, I'm forgetting off the top of my head who was responsible for it. But apparently what it is it's stop motion where they're really leaning into the uncanny valley of having stop motion puppets that almost look like real people and then telling like a grounded human drama story with them. Except that it's stop motion, and like the when they do the faces, they to change the expression and make mouth move and stuff like that, they change out little face plates, and there's a top and a bottom face that they mix and match,
right?
And they leave the line in, so like you can see the join. So like there's never this intent to try to trick you into thinking it's real, but it's really trying to lean into that weird, awkward, uncanny valley effect, apparently. So I'm intrigued by it. That sounds interesting to me. Boy in the World, I know nothing about except that the poster is very stylized in sort of a strange, like pencil drawing way. And then when Marnie was there, I don't know if it's actually Studio Ghibli, but it is in that style, like Japanese anime style that looks very much like Miyazaki movies, just in terms of the aesthetic. But I don't know anything about the plot.
Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with it as well.
Mm-hmm. But you and I have both seen Inside Out.
Yes. And enjoyed it, but we can talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right. Best director. Go ahead.
Best director, we have 5 for 5 with Best Picture nominations.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Adam McKay for The Big Short, who he's like Anchorman, I think.
I'll look him up really quick if you want to read the rest of the list.
George Miller for Mad Max Fury Road. And George Miller, if I remember correctly, did the other Mad Max.
That is correct. Mm-hmm.
And has done some other odd things. But yeah, he's not somebody that you would normally think to see on this list. And I think Adam McKay probably falls into that same category.
Adam, you're right. Adam McKay did like Anchorman and Step Brothers and stuff like that. Other movies that George Miller did, he did Happy Feet 1 and 2, and Babe, Pig in the City, and The Witches of Eastwick, and a few other things, but those are the ones that stand out to me. Lorenzo's Oil also.
Was he nominated for Babe? I don't think so.
That's
his only movie really that's on there that you could say, okay, maybe, but
the rest of the stuff
isn't. Yeah, it's kind of weird.
The only Oscar nomination that movie got was original song.
Okay. So again, like he kind of struck out when knowing that he did the original Mad Maxes. I didn't actually realize he did Happy Feet, that's a strange departure.
Yeah. He's got a diverse filmography, to be sure.
Yes.
I will say, just we'll save the longer discussion for later, but I was astounded, but pleasantly so, with how many nominations Mad Max got.
Agreed. Then we have Alejandro G. Inarritu for The Revenant, who won last year for
Birdman. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I saw the trailer for The Revenant like 3 times, knowing that I knew that director's name, and I could not think of or remember what it was that he did, and it finally clicked, but it was driving me bonkers for a while. Anyway.
And then we have Lenny Abrahamson for The Room.
Room.
And when I look back at his filmography, the only thing I had heard about the movie, that Frank movie where that guy wears that papier-mâché head.
Yeah, Michael Fassbender's in that.
Yeah. He did that. Other than that, I didn't really know anything that he had done. Mm-hmm. And then Tom McCarthy, also not somebody I'm remembering what he's done for Spotlight.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, Tom McCarthy. He's been an actor in a bunch of stuff. As a director, oh my God, I'm glad I looked him up, because although he only has a very small number of total movies that he has directed, the first 2 of them are The Station Agent and The Visitor, and I loved both of those movies.
Yes, The Station Agent was very great.
Yeah, and then The Visitor was that Richard Jenkins one where he ends up having to like stay with I'm forgetting the plot now, but like he was sort of outside his comfort zone. He had kind of lost everything that was sort of grounding him, but he sort of rediscovered himself and all that.
Yeah, that's right. He shows up and there's like immigrants
living in his house.
In his house that somebody had like rented to them, and
then but it was like they thought they were paying rent and it was all legit, but it turned out it was really not. And
yes.
Yeah. I love both of those movies. So I'm glad I looked him up.
Right. So these are all great directors, but really the
Mhm.
only one that kind of you're like, oh, that guy's on the list. Of course, is Alejandro G. Iñárritu.
Well, and he only, I mean, like last year we were saying, who is that guy? What has he
Who's
done?
that guy? Right.
Yeah, but then he wins, and funny how that people remember your name more after that.
Yeah. So it's interesting with the fact that like Spielberg is in that,
Yeah,
and Ridley Scott are both in that Best Picture
but not
category, but are not in the director. I kind of like that,
well, and we
Not that I
didn't
don't
have
like
any.
Spielberg again,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Sometimes what we see is some weird odd man out where there's like some movie that gets a best director nom but not a best picture nomination, which is always seems a little bit weird since there's more best picture nominations than director. But at the same time, that's what happens when you have voting processes, that you occasionally will get weird little results like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And this, again, I haven't seen all of these things, but this was another category that I feel like just in what I liked, I thought Straight Outta Compton, I thought that could have been that off movie that they're like, we're not going to give that a best picture because of the subject matter. But man, for what the story he was trying to tell and who he was trying to appeal to, he really kicked ass. And he got the best, like, because you can almost look at, like I talked about earlier, they had these great acting performances out of people who were not really known. Well, maybe that's a director thing, maybe he got the best out of those guys.
It's certainly a relevant part of that whole process, because how there's so many examples of movies where you have an actor or actress who has done great in other things, and then they're in a new movie and they're just awful, and you feel like that person has demonstrated talent previously. It's probably a direction.
And so to do it with an ensemble cast like that, where it's 5 or 6 people who are all playing real people and telling a real story, and to get those kind of performances and have the kind of impact that he did. Now that I'm kind of thinking about it, this is one where I feel like not that anybody again doesn't deserve to be on here, but again, what does the Academy enjoy? What speaks to them? They're not going to recognize the talent that he had to tell a powerful story, but still acknowledge the parts that those of us that grew up listening to NWA, like there are certain benchmarks in their career that we all remember, and he paid homage to those things as well. And again, I don't know if the Academy is going to recognize the talent that he put getting that,
yeah,
and giving depth to these iconic people, So anyway, but I think it's a great category. So I'm excited to see those as part of the Best Picture and the Best Director.
So next we have Best Actor, and we have Bryan Cranston in Trumbo, Matt Damon in The Martian, Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant, Michael Fassbender in Steve Jobs, and Eddie Redmayne in The Danish Girl. And that's a solid list too. I mean, I think of Bryan Cranston more as, from Breaking Bad than movies generally, although certainly he was great in that show. And then, Matt Damon and Leonardo DiCaprio are both repeat nominations, you know what I mean? Like not just from last year necessarily, but had previous nominations, especially Leonardo DiCaprio has had how many nominations now and still hasn't actually won?
Yeah.
It's several.
Right. And then Eddie Redmayne is also recently.
He won last year for the one where he was Stephen Hawking. I'm forgetting the Theory of Everything. Yep. When he really should have won for, I'm forgetting the name of the movie, which ruins the joke, but the Jupiter Ascending. Did you ever see that movie?
No.
That movie is bananas. And his performance in it is so silly in a way that I absolutely loved, because it became obvious to him what kind of movie this was, and so he just swung for the fences, and it is glorious.
Nice.
Anyway, but yeah, this seems like a pretty solid list too, with the caveats that we discussed up front. the controversy does not diminish that any of these actors did a great job in the respective movies. But of course, still the only one we've both seen is The Martian. And this is the first mention of Trumbo, which I believe is about the blacklisting of suspected communists in Hollywood in the 50s.
Yes. I was not 100% aware of what that was.
Yeah, I believe that's what that one's about. Do you want to read Best Actress?
It's my turn, but I hate doing this one because these are always these movies that I'm like,
yeah.
What is this?
A couple of these we've already mentioned.
Yeah, so we have Cate Blanchett for Carol, Brie Larson for Room, Jennifer Lawrence for Joy, Charlotte Rampling for 45 Years, and Saoirse Ronan.
I was going to guess Saoirse.
That's probably better. Ronan for Brooklyn. Cate Blanchett, obviously we know. I have no idea what Carol is.
That one. Yeah, I wonder if I'm actually conflating Carol and Brooklyn. I feel like they occupy a similar category box in my head.
Brooklyn, I just found. An Irish immigrant lands in the 50s Brooklyn where she quickly falls into a romance with a local when her past catches up with her. However, she must choose something.
Carol is maybe British lesbians in World War II or something like that.
Yeah. Carol is an aspiring photographer develops an intimate relationship with an older woman. So that sounds like what you described.
Yeah. Room we just talked about. Yep. Joy, I've at least seen the trailer for.
Yes, yeah, so it's like Silver Linings Playbook reboot.
Yeah, well, it's David O. Russell again, right?
Yeah,
and all of the same people he likes to make movies with, which I'm not complaining because I've liked all those movies so far. But yeah, it's a little surprising though that like this is the only nomination for that movie this year when the last couple have gotten way more. Maybe people are getting tired of the formula.
And then we have
45 years. I don't know.
Yeah, we talked about Room, but I wanted to mention that Brie Larson, I really liked her in Short Term 12.
Okay.
Did you see that?
No, I don't even know what it is.
It's one of those things. It's on a list. Like I think the list is called the 27 best Netflix movies you've never seen or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it's on Netflix. It's about people who work in a place where like I don't want to say disturbed kids, but like kids with like mental issues like come into. It's like an inpatient ward for kids, and sort of them trying to have this regular life while dealing with these kids. It's pretty interesting, and I don't want to spoil what goes on, so I won't really get too much into that. But it's worth watching on Netflix.
Okay. Short Term 12 is what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
And I actually see here that she was in Trainwreck last year. I didn't remember that she was in that, which was the Amy
Schumer movie. Yeah.
Amy Schumer movie, which I actually was much better than expected. Obviously not.
I heard it was good, and I would have interest in seeing it, but I didn't get around to it.
It's funny.
I believe it. I like Amy Schumer.
Yeah, it's really funny and touching, and it's what you want out of that kind of movie, done in a really well way. But that's.
Well, what about the basketball player? Is it LeBron James in it?
He is in it. He's pretty funny.
Yeah.
In it.
Okay, I was gonna say I remember seeing him in the trailer and just feeling like. I mean, I'm not saying basketball players shouldn't be in movies or even that they shouldn't play themselves, but I do not understand what role he has in this movie.
The guy that she is dating is the team doc, like or a celebrity knee doctor, basically.
Oh, okay.
So it's like really funny because he's like this kind of goofy, nerdy doctor whose best friend is LeBron James because like he's his doctor.
Mhm.
but LeBron is the one giving him, and they flip the roles, and the LeBron is like his, like what you would normally see in a movie as like basically like his female BFF who's like
Sure.
giving him relationship advice and telling him like
Well, that's certainly what
you're better
they
than
get. They get some
that.
mileage out of
Yeah.
that in the trailer, so I knew that that must happen at least. But yeah,
Oh yeah, they play that up through the whole movie as that like those two are playing the role of what is normally like the female
so
comedic
it's a
lead.
little bit of a gender flip on the classic rom com tropes, or
Yes,
yeah.
yes, and
Okay, cool.
using LeBron James as like the female friend, like as the
Yeah,
female friend in a normal rom com. It plays really well. LeBron does a great job. It's a funny movie. But anyway, that's
great.
not on this list.
Okay.
And I'm not sure what 45 years is at
Yeah, I
all.
don't know. We could look it up, or not. We could.
Or not. Let's move
Yeah.
on.
Let's move on. Best supporting actor. We have Christian Bale for The Big Short, Tom Hardy for The Revenant, Mark Ruffalo for Spotlight, Mark Rylance for Bridge of Spies, and Sylvester Stallone for Creed. All of those guys, except for Mark Rylance, are definitely, notable people. I don't remember who Mark Rylance is. I can look him up. But let's see. He looks like one of those vaguely familiar character actors that you see in a bunch of things and never remember his name. And sure enough, looking at his filmography, it's like, yep, that must be it, because I don't really, especially, I'm looking at this list of movies, and I don't especially think he doesn't jump out. None of that jumps out at me. But, I suppose if we see Bridge of Spies, then we'll be able to judge.
Yes. All right.
Given that he doesn't necessarily have the star power, it may well be that he must be really good in order to have snagged the nomination amongst those other bigger names.
Well, his IMDb summary says that he is considered the greatest stage actor of his generation.
Oh, okay. So does not as many movies, but he does more plays, I guess.
Yes, that's what it's sounding like.
Okay.
So we're on to Best Supporting Actress.
Yep.
We have Jennifer Jason Leigh for The Hateful Eight.
You're holding the phone like right in front of the camera.
Sorry, that's where my spreadsheet is. Set it down and read off of it. Jennifer Jason Leigh for The Hateful Eight.
Mm-hmm.
Rooney Mara for Carol. Rachel McAdams for Spotlight. And Alicia Vikander for The Danish Girl. And Kate Winslet in Steve Jobs. It's a pretty solid list also. Obviously, Jennifer Jason Leigh's been around forever. This is one of the few nominations for The Hateful Eight. Which, considering some of the interviews I saw with Quentin Tarantino leading into this movie's release about how he felt like this was one of his best films, it was underwhelming in me.
Yeah, critical reception. I haven't seen it yet. It is definitely one I plan to see, just because as a Tarantino fan, I'm interested, even if he has made a movie that I don't necessarily like as much. It's possible, but I would still be interested to see it. But my guess is, just cobbling together a suspicion from various things I've heard, is that he may have just gotten kind of so entranced with the visual look of it that he kind of maybe didn't keep his thumb on the script as well as he might have otherwise.
Got it.
That's all speculation, though, because I haven't seen it. But mostly the complaint I've heard about from people who didn't like it was that just they don't like any of the characters, that they're all awful people and you don't root for any of them, and you're kind of left with, what am I watching this for?
Fair enough. It is called The Hateful Eight. Yeah.
Yes. Alicia Vikander.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say Carol is obviously the what we talked about before, and Rooney Mara is was the girl with the dragon tattoo, the American one.
Yeah.
Which I was reading something about that the other day, and it doesn't appear that they are going to be continuing with that trilogy in the American.
Well, yeah,
series,
it didn't.
Unfortunately.
Well, I agree, unfortunately, in the sense that I would have watched them, but I get it. You know
Yeah,
what
I
I
mean, they
mean?
threw a
It's
lot of
like,
muscle behind it to not have
and
a lot of return.
right. And
Yeah,
then on top of that, the second and third book, while worth reading, I think, are even less easy to make into a good movie, I think.
right. Well, and I think they're also pointing out that the fact that the Swedish versions, uh, while maybe not anything that we would, people who are interested in this have seen those, and they are good and well
Hmm.
done, and makes it just less interesting. But either
Like
way,
there's already something there. And then, with the amount of weight they put behind the first one, as you said, for it to not really do that well, it's kind of.
yep.
Um,
But anyway, she was
Alicia
good in
Vick,
that, and she's
yeah.
good in this. Yep. And so I thought you were going to
Um,
say Alicia Vikander.
yeah, the only other thing I've seen her in is Ex Machina, but I loved her in that. So, and we'll be talking about that movie in a little bit.
Yep. And then Winslet and McAdams, very
Yeah.
good. These appear to be very good movies. I'm sure they
Hmm.
do wonderfully in them. So,
Yep.
all right. While you are reading this list, I'm going to be listening. I just have to walk over here for it.
All right.
Okay.
Lynn is barking under the desk for some reason. So the next category is Best Original Screenplay. And so we have Bridge of Spies, written by Matt Sharman, and then also, surprise to me, Ethan Cohen and Joel Cohen are apparently also credited as screenwriters on Bridge of Spies. I had no idea. But sure enough, there it is. Then Ex Machina by Alex Garland. Please don't bark, Luna. Inside Out by Pete Docter, Meg Lefauve, and Josh Cooley. Spotlight by Josh Singer and Tom McCarthy. And Straight Outta Compton, the one nomination for that movie, by Jonathan Herman and Andrea Berloff. So yeah, the biggest shock to me was that the Coen brothers co-wrote Bridge of Spies.
Well,
I hadn't known that at all until I saw the nomination.
I actually it made me look up their filmography because I also thought the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like they are actually have worked on a lot of things that, like, they worked on Unbroken.
Hmm.
Uh, they worked on, I don't remember what the other ones were, but there was a
Well,
couple in there that I saw that weren't their main credits.
yeah.
Where I said, "Wow, that's interesting." I think
Yeah.
Unbroken was maybe it's more recently. So it's stuff like Unbroken and this,
Mm-hmm.
um, and
Well,
they
maybe
didn't, and
they
True
do.
Grit. The
Well, that was one of their movies. They
That
directed
was their
that one
movie.
too.
That's
Yeah.
okay. That
Mm-hmm.
was their movie. Okay. My bad.
But so maybe it may well be that they actually do a lot of script doctory type stuff, and then it just kind of depends on how much of their version ends up in the final product, whether they would normally get credited or not.
Right.
But in any case, so that was a surprise to just see their names there. Kind of nice to see Inside Out get a script nomination, because I thought the script for that really was extremely good.
Yes, I'm glad
Um,
that lives outside the animation category, which we'll
mhm.
get to that. But
And then Ex Machina, I really loved too. I feel like it's again, it's some of the nuance of the movie is easy to miss when you're watching it the first time. But I feel like when you really sort of dig into it after having seen it, there's some really interesting stuff going on there, even below the surface of the already interesting, straightforward part.
yes,
So I've seen Inside Out and Ex Machina. You've seen Inside Out also, but you've also seen Straight Outta Compton, which I haven't. But it sounds like you've already kind of
I,
expressed.
I've given the high level that
Yeah.
for now that we were going to discuss.
Hmm.
I'm glad that it got a nomination for what is clearly the things that I talked about that I thought it did really well, which,
Hmm.
so.
Yeah.
So
So.
best adapted screenplay,
Hmm.
we have Charles Randolph and Adam McKay for The Big Short. Adam McKay also directed.
Hmm.
Um, Again, nothing on here that we haven't seen yet
Yeah.
before. Nick Hornby for Brooklyn.
Yeah, so there's something right there. To just we know Nick Hornby's name.
Yeah, now that I hadn't clicked with me before until I just read this that was who did this movie because
It clicked
he
with me when
is
I made the spreadsheet, and then I forgot again.
I love his stuff. You know,
Yeah,
he's
yeah. High Fidelity and About a Boy and um,
oh, I'm
or am I
missing.
thinking of a different?
Well, no, Fever Pitch was his. I don't know if he wrote the movie, but that's his book.
Mm-hmm.
And then he has a ton of books that weren't made
Yeah.
into movies. Like he's a book author by trade who was asked to adapt his own movie in High Fidelity and
Mm-hmm.
then has made this secondary career out of it. And I'm a big fan of his.
Mm-hmm.
Really funny. It's black comedy stuff, but not like super dark, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always typically a happy ending.
Yeah.
Phyllis Nagy for
Mm-hmm.
Carol, who I'm not familiar with off the top of my head. Drew Goddard for The Martian, which I
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize was adapted. Um,
Yeah, there's a book which, well, go ahead and read the last one, but then let's circle back to Martian a little bit.
Emma Donoghue for Room.
So The Martian is a book. I had read the book before the movie came out.
Oh, really?
It's an interesting book from a publishing perspective because it was one of those sort of breakout examples of someone who basically wrote a book on their blog and then it became popular enough that they got a big publishing contract. But so I read the book and I feel like kind of like the last time I felt this way about a book movie combination was Life of Pi, where I feel like the two formats really complement each other extremely well. The movie being much better, of course, at showing like visceral action and really selling the vastness of space and the desolate Martian plains and all of that. But then the book being able to get much more into the characters' minds and their thoughts and motivations. And then, of course, there's big segments of the plot in the book that have to be, streamlined for the movie version. But I feel like they go together extremely well. So anyone who is I would say basically anyone who has read the book or seen the movie, I recommend doing the other, unless of course you hated it, which, in which case you can feel free to disregard my suggestion. But yeah, so that I think is, it's an excellent, like almost independent of how great you think the movie is as a movie. I think it's an excellent adapted script.
Awesome. And I looked up quickly Phyllis Nagy and Emma Donoghue.
Mm-hmm.
Phyllis Nagy's profile on IMDb says Phyllis Nagy is a writer known for Carol.
All right. So maybe this is her first big thing. So good for her getting Oscar nomination on her first outing.
Yes. And Emma Donoghue's is fairly similar. It says is known for Room.
Yeah.
And the 73rd annual Golden Globes. She was whatever the writer does.
What year was that?
I am unsure.
I don't know
either.
either.
To pull it back up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but both of them are obviously relative newcomers. So that's exciting.
Yeah. So our next category is Best Foreign Film.
It was 2016 was the 73rd. It was this most recent one.
Oh, okay. So it's her fault that Martian won Best Comedy, which is like, yes. I don't like, it's totally independent of how much you liked The Martian as a movie. For it to win Best Comedy is just nonsense because it's just period, not a comedy.
Right.
I was listening to an episode of the Doug Loves Movies podcast, which if any of you out there love movies and like podcasts, I recommend that one. It's basically a bunch of live shows where a stand-up comedian gets other stand-up comedians on to do trivia games about movies, and it's very funny. But in any case, what he was saying about that Golden Globe win was there were funnier movies also set in space last year. Like, even if you wanted to limit it to just like, but like the best comedy set in space, that there would still be other funnier movies.
That's funny.
But anyway, so best foreign film, we have Embrace of the Serpent from Colombia, Mustang from France, Son of Saul from Hungary, Thebe, which is a fun word to say. I hope it means something interesting. Thebe from Jordan, and A War from Denmark. And I am like, the movie might be fine, but I'm immediately suspicious of movies that have such a generic, like faux generic title like that. You know what I mean? A War. Might be a translation thing. I don't know.
Yes,
movie might
it
be
might
fun.
make more sense in whatever.
Yeah. But
I don't remember what
I'm going to make a special effort to see at least one of these this year, because there's been a couple years in a row where I didn't manage to see any of the foreign language films, and I feel that's a failing on my part. So I'm going to try make an extra effort to see at least one of those this year.
Got it. So on to best original score.
Mm-hmm.
We have Bridge of Spies,
Mm-hmm.
Carol, The Hateful Eight, Sicario,
Mm-hmm.
and Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
I meant to include the composer names on this list and forgot.
I assume Star Wars is John Williams.
Yep. Hateful Eight is Enrico Morricone, the guy who does all those westerns.
Yep, Marconi, I think.
Morricone. Yeah, I don't remember how to pronounce it. I am not going to look up the actual composer names right now. We can maybe circle back on that at some point.
We'll cover it later.
Yeah, the only movie of any of those that I've seen is Star Wars: The Force Awakens, which I mean, it's a great soundtrack. I love the movie. I bought the soundtrack on CD or not CD, but on iTunes, because it's more Star Wars music. So, I mean, I think it's a great score in that context, but it's in some ways hard to judge against other movies because they have so many of these themes that push all these nostalgia buttons. So it kind of has a leg up from the get-go.
Right. Hold on real quick.
Okay. So while Mike is muted, I'm going to go ahead and read the Best Original Song category. We have Earned It from 50 Shades of Grey, Manta Ray from Racing Extinction, Simple Song number 3 from Youth, Till It Happens to You from The Hunting Ground, and Writings on the Wall, which is that opening theme song from Spectre, the most recent James Bond movie. So 3 of those movies are movies that I have no idea what they are. Movies that only have the one nomination on the list: Racing Extinction, Youth, and The Hunting Ground. And those things are hard to say what those are. I have not listened to those songs yet. Although one of the good things about the Best Original Song category is that it is much easier to listen to the song. You can usually just pull them up on YouTube. But that raises an interesting question. When you are judging something like the Best Original Song in a movie, are you only judging it as the best song, as a standalone song, or are you also interested in how well it reflects and the themes of the movie that it's in, how well it's used in the movie? Like, how is it portrayed? Is it over an interesting thing, or is it just on the end credits? So when you're judging Best Original Song in a movie, what are the criteria that you're looking for in this context? Hard to say. Mike and I have both seen Spectre. He's still muted, so I'm going to continue to vamp here for a while. I felt with Spectre that I feel like I almost don't even know how to judge Writings on the Wall, because I listen to it and I'm like, yep, that's a Bond theme song, all right. It's fine, I guess. It sounds like a Bond theme. That's what its job is, and so good on that, I suppose. But at the same time, it almost becomes this like generic thing where I can't even really think of it as anything separate from just it's a Bond theme. And then I haven't actually even heard any of the other songs yet. The only other movie on the list that wasn't a movie I've never heard of before is 50 Shades of Grey, which is a thing. That's a movie. I'm not going to go out of my way to see that one. But, I mean, it's a thing. It has its own audience, and that's fine. I don't know about that song, but we'll see. Well, Mike is still off camera for the moment, so I'll just go ahead and continue on for now, and we can circle back on his opinion about the Writings on the Wall song at some point. But the next category is Best Production Design. And the nominated films in that category are Bridge of Spies, The Danish Girl, Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, and The Revenant. And just like with Best Picture, Mike and I have both seen Mad Max Fury Road and The Martian. We have not seen the others yet. It's interesting, a question with production design, just because production design is one where the flashier movies are always going to be either period pieces in a setting that is not, really similar to current day, or often it's ones with big flashy action set pieces or something like that. And so that certainly applies to Mad Max Fury Road and The Martian. The Revenant is more in the period piece Western outdoor sort of thing. But that one I know has a lot of outdoor winter photography, so that would probably be difficult to work around too. But having not seen the movies, it's hard to say. Danish Girl, I believe, takes place in Denmark? That's right, for Danish, isn't it? And that's also a period piece, so hard to say there. And then, of course, Bridge of Spies, also a Cold War period piece. And Mike has returned. Welcome back.
Yep. Unfortunately, though, I'm going to have to cut this off. I got to go to the pharmacy. Fiance is not feeling well to a point that I actually have to go help.
Okay. Well, so I hope she feels better. I will just kind of I'll rattle off the remainder of the nominees for this, and so we will schedule another episode sometime soonish to talk about the movies that we have both seen already.
Yes. So I apologize for having to do this, but and she even said that she's like, I wouldn't have interrupted you if it wasn't important, but she's not feeling good.
These things happen. It's important to have priorities.
Yes. So, all right. Well, I'll let you.
All right.
Do I need to hang up or just leave it?
Yeah, I think you can hang up and because I'm hosting it, it'll be fine.
All right.
All right. So
rattle off the rest, and we will talk
another time
about the rest of them. All right. Yep. Bye.
Bye. All right. So let's go ahead and just finish these up then. So the next category is Best Cinematography. The nominees are Carol, The Hateful Eight, Mad Max Fury Road, The Revenant, and Sicario. Once again, the only one that Mike and I have seen is Mad Max, although I am very pleased to see this movie in this category because I thought the cinematography in Mad Max is excellent. And then, of course, The Hateful Eight, we were just talking about how Tarantino put a lot of work into the cinematography for that movie, so hopefully it's good. And we'll have to see the others to judge those, although certainly The Revenant, given the director, the cinematography in Birdman was pretty good, so we'll see it here, even though it's in a very different sort of setting. The next category is Best Costume Design. Nominees are Carol, Cinderella, The Danish Girl, Mad Max Fury Road, and The Revenant again. And somewhat like I was saying with production design, the costume design nominations tend to go for either period pieces or sci-fi, fantasy, action sorts of things. Mad Max Fury Road sure has some impressive costumes in it, but of course that's once again the only one that Mike and I have seen. In Best Makeup and Hairstyling, the three nominees are Mad Max Fury Road, The Revenant, and a movie that has the unlikely title of The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out a Window and Disappeared. I think I am in love with that title. I just like it. It's long and mysterious. But then, of course, similar to costumes, makeup and hairstyling, I liked it in Mad Max. quite a bit, but we'll have to see some of the others in order to really judge. Next category is Best Documentary Feature. Best Documentary Feature. And the nominees are Amy, Cartel Land, The Look of Silence, What Happened, Miss Simone, and Winter on Fire, Ukraine's Fight for Freedom. These were listed in order both alphabetically and in terms of the length of the title, which is kind of funny. I have not heard anything about any of those. So often the best documentary nominees are on Netflix, so check those out, people. Documentaries are good. Nominations for Best Sound Mixing are Bridge of Spies, Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, The Revenant, and Star Wars The Force Awakens. This is the first category where Mike and I have both seen at least 3 of the nominees. As previously mentioned, we've both seen Mad Max and The Martian. I have seen Star Wars The Force Awakens. Mike has still not. Yes, it's a terrible tragedy that he is not getting his act together, but it's a thing. We'll tease him about it next time. Best Sound Editing, the nominations are very similar. Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, The Revenant, Sicario, and Star Wars Force Awakens. So the difference here being that we have swapped out Sicario for Bridge of Spies. Otherwise, they're the same. And, we've seen the same ones of those. The last 2 categories left are we have Best Visual Effects for Ex Machina, Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, The Revenant, and Star Wars The Force Awakens. Mike has still only seen Mad Max Fury Road and The Martian, but I have seen 4 of the 5 of these nominees with Ex Machina, Mad Max, The Martian, and Star Wars, but still not The Revenant. The last category that we're covering, we typically do not do the short features. The Best Film Editing nominees are The Big Short, Mad Max Fury Road, The Revenant, Spotlight, and Star Wars The Force Awakens. I've seen Mad Max and Star Wars. Mike has only seen Mad Max. And those are the 2016 Oscar nominations. So that leaves The Revenant as the most nominated movie with 12 nominations. And right behind it is Mad Max Fury Road with 10 nominations. I am astounded. I loved that movie deeply, but I never imagined it would get so many Oscar nominations. Who would have thought? Following that, we have The Martian with 7, and then Bridge of Spies, Spotlight, and Carol, each with 6. And then The Big Short and Star Wars both have 5. Star Wars is all the technical ones. And then they trickle off after that. So lots of exciting movies to see. We'll be back with some more in-depth discussion of the movies that we've seen and updates as far as our progress on the spreadsheet. Our starting percentages, as of right now, I have seen, I have to scroll up, 25.5% of the movies, and Mike is at 19.8%. So not that different, pretty close. So we'll see how that progresses. And so we'll see you next time. See good movies, people.